to have these arrangements, or they're going into group licensing with the players to have these arrangements. That's another area you could make the argument, well, okay, if you do it for the football player, you need to make sure there's some balance with and you're doing it for female athletes as well, connecting them, giving them that exposure to outside sponsors as well. But the short answer is no one really knows.
So, just to be clear, what we're talking about now is not having colleges pay their athletes, but allowing athletes to get endorsement deals and make money from their likeness. And it seems like the way you're describing it, right, the athletes themselves benefit, there's room for the schools to benefit. Who's against this? When we have this conversation, what's the counter argument?
There aren't many. So I think more and more people actually who even work in college sports believe this is definitely doable, and there are people who believe this is actually where it's going to go at some point, but they can't yet because of the pending litigation that still could go on for a couple more years with appeals. But there are prominent athletic directors who tell me, yes, this is definitely doable and it's coming and it's fair. The argument that I made earlier is a key thing you hear, that it would be abused, right? So it would just be used as a recruiting tool, and boosters would use this NIL money to hook up players and recruit them and still promise them you're going to get X amount of money and, from this particular, sponsor and this and that. That's the counter argument you sometimes hear, but this is a lot more palatable for people in college sports than what Jeffrey Kessler is fighting for. And that is much more of an open market. And that is actually schools being able to, spend the money on the players themselves, because deep down, the people in college sports know they can't control that because there is value for these players. And schools would pay their players a good amount of them. Some may decide not to and may join, another association or create a new league if that happens, but a fair amount of them would.
In this conversation, it's kind of impossible to avoid how these policies affect the AAU circuit, right, or high school football and stuff. To what extent do you think they're interconnected, where whatever policies the NCAA makes or does not make, that influences, how high school prospects are recruited and all that stuff? I'm a U of A grad, so the past year's been rough for me with the whole Aiton Miller thing. So could you speak to kind of the relationship between the NCAA and some of the seedier stuff that happens on the high school circuit?
Yeah, I mean, right now, look what that case out of New York has found with college basketball, and it's implicated so many schools and coaches. I don't think we're done with it because there's still more trials to come. Is what a lot of us who have known how college sports works, and how college basketball works, is this is how it operates. I mean, for a lot of players, there are these, under the table agreements, and, between, AAU coaches and handlers and, agents and runners and, marketers, marketing people, and the players' families. Sometimes the players themselves don't even necessarily know what's going on, behind their back, even within like their families and, or their coaches and, and all that, of who's getting paid off them. And the NCAA policy of not allowing athletes to be paid, I think really has created this black market. I mean, it's pushed it under the radar, under the ground, in some ways where, it is abusive, because it can be people not looking out for the best interests of the players. They're just looking to, get paid, and they're using the players and without the players' knowledge or maybe even the family's knowledge. But we know that there is value for these players beyond their scholarship because this black market does exist. And this college basketball scandal, so to speak, has brought that to light. I mean, this is pretty common, of how you acquire players. I don't want to say it's everyone, and it's not everyone, but this is how the game goes to recruit, and it's to a different degree, it's how the game goes to recruit college football players as well. It's just not, you don't have the AAU circuit, but it's different types of handlers, different types of people with their hands out in order to secure the services of some players.
Does it make sense then to argue that if we were to allow colleges to pay athletes, right, if we were to bring all of this above boards, then those kind of black market, under the table FBI investigation type things, that those will go away, right? The like sunlight is the best disinfectant argument. Is that valid?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that's like the biggest argument to do it. I would say the biggest argument to let players be paid is just basic common fairness. That like any other college student can get paid off their own name, image, and likeness, off their talent. You know, when I was a student many years ago at the University of Maryland, I could get paid for writing at the student newspaper. I could get paid even while in college for when I worked at the Washington Post. I was still a student. I was still a journalism student, but I could still get paid. Natalie Portman was a mega star as a Star Wars actress when she was still a college student. She could get paid and still be a college student and, you know, do intramural activities or whatever. So I would say that would be the bigger reason. But Sunshine, I think, still could help. I don't think it's going to get rid of, you know, all of the corruption. I don't want to like paint that picture because corrupt people are still corrupt people, and I think would still try to, you know, take advantage of things. But bringing it above board and shining more light, I think would help.
Brief update. In between the time of this podcast recording and its release, a verdict came down on the Alston vs. NCAA case. The court ruled that the NCAA cannot bar schools from offering players compensation and benefits related to education in excess of their scholarship money and cost of attendance payments. But the ruling stopped short of requiring schools to pay players. We'll be right back with the rest of the interview.
Hey UC3P listeners, I'm Thomas.
And I'm Nick.
In the United States, public faith in the military remains sky high, while trust in other government institutions sinks to an all-time low.
At the same time, fewer than 1% of Americans will ever serve in the armed forces, and the cultural divide between active duty troops and the civilian population continues to widen.
UC3P presents a new series, Thank You for Your Service, where we take a deep dive into the complex world of civil military affairs.
We'll address the politicization of the military, defense policy in the news, and the importance of staying informed in a democracy.
Join us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts as we explore how our professional military institution relates to the society it serves.
So we talked about kind of the effect, the downstream effect of college sports on youth sports. What about the upstream effects, right? So how much does what the NCAA does or doesn't do, how much of that is dependent on what the NBA and NFL do? So there was this new program announced, like the G League Professional Path program, that offers elite high school basketball players the opportunity to forego college and get paid a salary, spending a year out of high school so then they can enter the draft the next year. One and done rules. We mentioned Zion, kind of the elephant in the room in this conversation right now. So to what extent are those policies interconnected? Is, the NCAA connected to the whims of NBA and NFL rules?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's no doubt that there's some things that are out of the NCAA's hands. The NBA one and done rule. Nothing the NCAA can do about that. They've been trying for years. Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner now, is on record, here for a while saying he does want to change that rule, lower the age limit to 18 and let players come, again, straight out of high school. And the NCAA is all for that. They would love it. The NBA Players Association will have to sign off on it. I do think we'll probably get back to that, the days when LeBron James and Kobe Bryant and Kevin Garnett could just go straight out of high school to the NBA. The NBA, for their purposes, they wanted to get away from him because they felt it wasn't really a good business decision for them. They were getting, yes, you got LeBron and Kobe and Kevin Garnett, but you got so many others trying to do this, and most of them just aren't, physically or emotionally mature enough and ready, to handle professional basketball. Same thing NFL to a different degree a little bit. You have a 3-year rule. Basically, you have to be 3 years out of high school before you can declare. So those players as well, have to, for the most part, have to come to college football. The G League, the Gatorade League, it's pretty interesting because they're now going to start paying more money, to the players. I think upwards of, maybe $100,000 or so, a year for a salary. You could see some competition a little bit between the G League and the NCAA over some players. I still think if the top talent, say the one and done rule is still in effect and you can't go to the NBA straight out of high school, I still think the elite players for the most part, will still go to college instead of the G League, because there's just so much more exposure you can still get by playing at Duke or North Carolina, than you get in in the G League, at least as it's occupied now.
This is a timely conversation to have, right? And at least at the time we're recording it, we're still unsure about what's going to happen with Zion, right? Is he going to decide to come back? Is he what's going on with that? And I'm curious, in your opinion, if you were his advisor, would you advise him to come back, to finish the season with Duke, to come back but just for the tournament? What types of things do you think he's considering?
Yeah, what I would say, it's a difficult decision. What I would say is do what he wants to do, right? There's so many people and so many, sports writers and talking heads out there, and pro athletes are going to have one opinion one way or the other. And either one makes sense, honestly, but I think it's up to him. I totally get, if he says, look, I'm not getting paid for this. I need to protect myself and not, damage, my knee, potentially anymore. Don't damage my stock anymore. And I'm going to sit out for an extended period, or maybe even the rest of the season. And then I'm going to the NBA and I'm fine. And if that's what he thinks, great. I totally understand that. On the flip side, I would totally understand if he says, look, this is the only time I'll get to play college basketball, play with, these teammates, play at Cameron Indoor, be in the NCAA tournament, get all the exposure and the fun and enjoyment of that. And I want to play and I want to win. Totally get that as well. It's not necessarily an easy decision, but I think it just should be up to him to decide. I will say this in a strange way. Look, I think Zion Williamson may have made himself a lot more money the other night by getting injured, and more money from his endorsement deal, because now Nike is the shoemaker who had the shoe blow up, and clearly it was an inferior product, that particular shoe. And Nike, of course, is going to want to get Zion Williamson. Everyone wants to sign him to the shoe endorsement deal when he turns pro. The most marketable and probably best player who's going to be coming to the NBA since LeBron James in 2003. And now Nike may have to up the ante on how much they have to offer to get Zion to play, to sign with him, because of what happened with the shoe. And that could just raise all the other shoe companies' prices up as well. So in a perverse way, and having this happen may have made Zion Williamson a lot of money.
Yeah, that brand recovery is going to be fairly expensive, I think, for Nike.
Yeah, I think we're all excited to see if he does sign with Nike, what his first ad is like, or if he signs with Adidas, what's going on, what's going on in that ad campaign. But if we can take a couple steps back, earlier when we asked you if you are the king of sports, what your ideal world is. And you answered by talking about allowing players to essentially to receive money from their likeness. Is that our goal in the sense that gets us closer to a spot where college players get played? Or is that the end goal? Is that what we should be, in your opinion, what we should be striving for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe that college athletes should be allowed to be paid. Now, what the exact structure is, I think there are good arguments, for and against different models. I think that names, images, and likenesses is at least the best starting point. That would make sense. It doesn't necessarily have to be, the end game, but I think that could be a good starting place.
Something that I was just curious to hear your opinion on is, right after this Zion thing happened, I think one of the things that makes basketball so fun now is players really are outspoken. And you saw a lot of NBA players came back with some of them pretty explicit thoughts about the state of the NCAA. I think the one that comes most readily to mind is DeMarcus Cousins for the Golden State Warriors had some less than kind words, which I think the university wouldn't want us to say on air, about the NCAA. As someone who studies this and someone who's really involved in that world, what do you think when you hear these players, these people for whom the NCAA worked great, right? It set them up to be millionaires. Like, how do you feel when